The Mamluk Sabre, an iconic weapon whose elegant sweeping curve is recognized across the world, is not merely a piece of military hardware, but a direct descendant of ancient martial traditions. Its story does not begin in the sun-scorched sands of Egypt, but far away, in the vast wind-swept grasslands of the Great Steppe. To understand this legendary blade is to trace a lineage of warfare perfected by nomadic horsemen, where speed, mobility, and the art of the mounted strike dictated the evolution of weaponry. The sabre's very form is a testament to a philosophy of combat born in the saddle, a philosophy that would be adopted, refined, and ultimately immortalized by the Mamluk warrior elite. The direct ancestor of the Mamluk sabre is the Turkish kilij, a sword that was the quintessential sidearm for the nomadic peoples of the Great Steppe. For these horse cultures, warfare was a fluid and fast-paced affair. A straight sword, ideal for thrusting in infantry formations, was ill-suited for a warrior moving at high speed. The kilij's revolutionary design featured a pronounced curve, a feature developed with the specific ergonomics of mounted combat in mind. This curvature allowed a rider to deliver devastating cutting and slashing blows to an opponent without needing to alter their grip or lose momentum. The blade's arc followed the natural motion of the rider's arm, creating a slicing action that was far more effective from a moving platform than a simple chopping motion. This design principle, form following function, was the genetic code that the Mamluk Sabre would inherit, carrying the legacy of the steppe horseman into the heart of the Islamic world. Interestingly, despite its later fame, the sabre was not the primary weapon in the Mamluk arsenal for centuries. That distinction belonged to the composite bow. The Mamluks were, first and foremost, master horse archers, a fact meticulously detailed in military treatises of the era, such as the Firuziyya. These manuals outlined a sophisticated tactical doctrine centered on the bow's ability to disrupt and demoralize enemy formations from a distance. The ideal Mamluk warrior was trained to fire a storm of arrows with lethal accuracy while at a full gallop. The sabre was a secondary weapon, reserved for the final, decisive moments of close-quarters combat. A fascinating detail described in the treatises illustrates this hierarchy of arms. Before engaging in archery, a Mamluk rider would first hang his sabre from his wrist by a lanyard. This ensured his hands were free to wield the bow, his primary tool of war, while keeping the sword ready for the moment the enemy lines broke and the cavalry charge began. The initial engagement was a matter of archery. The sabre was for the bloody aftermath. The construction of the Mamluk sabre was a masterful blend of functionality and distinct regional style. Its blade was defined by a constant, graceful curve along its entire length and a notable absence of a yeoman, the flared, sharpened section on the back of the blade near the tip, which was common on other saber types. This lack of yeoman made it heavier and more robust, concentrating its mass behind the cutting edge and making it exceptionally well-suited for powerful, cleaving blows. The hilt featured a crossguard, or kilon, of a typically West Asian design, a form that can be seen on weapons from the region dating back to the 16th century. The grip itself was topped with a characteristic rounded pommel, which included a small hole for a temyak, a woolen strap or lanyard. This simple addition was crucial for weapon retention during the chaos of a cavalry melee, ensuring the precious blade would not be lost. Each element of its design was a product of centuries of battlefield evolution, perfected for its role as the ultimate close combat weapon for the horse-mounted warrior. Imagine a sun-scorched courtyard in a 13th century Cairo palace. A young Mamluk, barely a man, holds his first saber. The weight is unfamiliar, the balance a new language his body must learn. His instructor, a veteran whose scars tell stories of countless battles, guides his hand, teaching him how to feel the weapon's center of gravity and how to let its natural curvature do the work. He explains that the saber is not a brute instrument, but an extension of the rider's will, designed to flow with the horse's motion in a deadly dance of steel. The desert sun glints off the polished blade, momentarily blinding the youth. In that brilliant flash, the weapon is transformed. It is no longer just a tool of death, but a work of art, a symbol of his new life, and the physical embodiment of a martial tradition born on horseback, a world away, on the endless plains of the Great Steppe. To understand the men who wielded the iconic saber, one must first dismantle the myths surrounding their very existence. The Mamluks were a unique socio-military phenomenon, a warrior class born from servitude that rose to become the masters of Egypt. Their story is a complex tapestry of loyalty, ambition, and ruthless political maneuvering, challenging the very definition of slavery in the medieval world. Their journey from the slave markets of the Caucasus to the throne of the Cairo Sultanate is not just a military history, but a profound social and political drama. The Mamluk system as a formal institution emerged in the 13th century under the Ayyubid dynasty, which was founded by the legendary Saladin. Seeking to create a corps of professional, utterly loyal soldiers, the Ayyubids established a system of recruiting and training warriors from outside the established Arab and Egyptian power structures. These recruits were sourced predominantly from the vast territories of the Great Steppe and the North Caucasus. Historical sources confirm they were mainly Polovsians, Kipchaks, Circassians, Georgians, Abkhazians, and other peoples renowned for their martial prowess. While some data suggest that Russians were among them, this remains a point of historical debate. These young boys, purchased as slaves, were brought to the barracks of Cairo, cut off from their past lives and ready to be molded into the ultimate soldiers. However, the popular characterization of the Mamluks as mere warrior slaves is a significant oversimplification and fundamentally inaccurate. While their journey began in bondage, their status was transformed upon the completion of their rigorous training. This comprehensive military and physical education, known as Furusiya, was a crucible that forged them into elite warriors. Upon graduating and reaching adulthood, every Mamluk was formally manumitted. This was not a symbolic gesture, but a profound legal and social transformation, formalized by a document of liberation known as the Itaka. Alongside his freedom, the new Mamluk warrior received a full complement of military equipment, a horse, weapons, and armor. In the eyes of the law, a rank-and-file Mamluk was now the equal of any free man, including the Sultan himself, who was also a product of the same system. This stands in stark contrast to the later Ottoman Devshirme system, with which the Mamluks are often confused. The Ottoman Kular, or slaves of the port, remained in a state of legal servitude for their entire lives, always dependent on the will of the Sultan. They could never achieve the legal or social parity of the Ottoman hereditary rulers. The Mamluk system, by contrast, was a self-perpetuating military aristocracy, where a man's origins as a slave were a prerequisite for entry, not a permanent stain on his status. As the historian Lev Gumilyov noted, the Mamluks were largely content with this arrangement and had little desire to escape. Their service was not a life sentence of slavery, but a direct path to immense power, wealth, and influence. The turning point that propelled the Mamluks from servants to masters came during the reign of the Ayyubids. In the 1170s, Saladin granted his Mamluks land allotments, known as iqta, turning them into de facto feudal lords. This decision, intended to secure their loyalty, ironically provided them with the independent power base that would ultimately doom the Ayyubid dynasty. The Mamluks were no longer just soldiers. They were landed nobles with their own resources and ambitions. In 1250, this ambition reached its bloody climax. A group of Mamluk officers assassinated Saladin's descendant, Sultan al-Muazzam Turanshah, and seized control of Egypt. With this act, they established the Mamluk Sultanate, a formidable empire that they would rule for nearly 300 years. Even within their own ranks, the Mamluks were not a monolithic entity, but a collection of competing factions, often based on ethnicity. According to the research of Turkish scholar Bahiriye Uçok, the Mamluks of Sultan al-Salih Ayyub, who reigned just before the takeover, were predominantly Circassians and Georgians. These Circassian Mamluks, despite being a minority in the early period, quickly earned a reputation as master conspirators and formidable players in the relentless and often lethal palace intrigues of Cairo, proving that they were as skilled in politics as they were on the battlefield.
The combat prowess of the Mamluk warrior was not the result of mastering a single weapon, but of a highly sophisticated and holistic military doctrine known as Furusiya. This comprehensive training system forged a complete warrior, skilled in every facet of medieval warfare. The regimen was grueling and all-encompassing, including not only swordsmanship but also archery, spear exercises, wrestling, and, above all, expert horsemanship. To understand the Mamluk in battle is to appreciate this integrated system, in which the saber, for all its fame, played a very specific and calculated role. A crucial and often misunderstood point is that the Mamluk's primary weapon was the bow. He was, first and foremost, a horse archer of exceptional skill, trained to unleash volleys of arrows with deadly precision while riding at a full gallop. The entire Mamluk battle strategy was often predicated on the devastating power of their mounted archery. The initial phase of an engagement involved harassing and weakening the enemy from a distance, thinning their ranks and breaking their morale with a relentless shower of arrows. The saber was a weapon of the melee, the tool for the final, decisive charge, but it was only drawn after the bow had done its critical work. The Mamluk cavalry was renowned for its tactical discipline, particularly its mastery of the feigned retreat. This was a classic steppe tactic refined to a deadly art form. A Mamluk squadron would charge, engage briefly, and then seemingly break and flee in disarray. An undisciplined enemy, sensing victory, would often give chase, breaking their own formation in a disorganized pursuit. This was precisely the trap. After luring their pursuers a sufficient distance, the Mamluks would, on a signal, suddenly wheel their agile horses around and charge into the now demoralized and scattered enemy. It was at this moment of shock and confusion that the sabers were brought to bear with terrifying effect, cutting down a foe who was psychologically and tactically unprepared for the sudden reversal. The Mamluks' technique for wielding the saber was intrinsically linked to the weapon's design. The constant sweeping curve of the blade was its greatest asset, and the fighting style was developed to maximize its cutting potential. Unlike European swordsmanship that might involve full-armed thrusts and chops, a Mamluk warrior did not fully extend his arm when striking. Instead, the blows were generated by a powerful rotation of the wrist combined with a small, sharp movement of the elbow. This fluid rotational motion allowed the curved blade to slice deeply, using the enemy's own momentum against them. It was a technique that enabled a skilled rider to deliver multiple, rapid strikes in quick succession, allowing him to engage several opponents as he rode through their broken ranks. To complement their offensive capabilities, the Mamluks were well protected by armor that varied according to rank and wealth. The common warrior was equipped with practical and effective gear, typically a padded combat garment worn under a coat of chainmail. The elite and wealthy Mamluks, however, could afford superior protection. They often wore lamellar armor, known as a javshan, constructed from small overlapping plates laced together, and protected their heads with metal helmets that featured chainmail curtains or barmetsi to guard the neck and shoulders. As military technology evolved, so too did their armor. By the 15th century, more advanced mail and plate armor, which integrated metal plates directly into a chainmail suit, became the most common form of protection for these formidable warriors.
The end of the 18th century marked a dramatic collision of worlds, as the revolutionary fervor and modern military machine of France crashed upon the ancient shores of Egypt. In early July 1798, an army under the command of a young and ambitious general, Napoleon Bonaparte, disembarked, bringing with it not just soldiers and cannons, but the ideals and ambitions of a new European era. It was not long before this modern force came face to face with the rulers of the land, the Mamluks. The French encountered a warrior class that seemed to be from another time, a dazzling force of highly trained horsemen, led by the governor, Murad Bey, who were masters of a form of warfare that had dominated the region for centuries. The decisive confrontation occurred on July 21, 1798, in a battle that would become legendary, the Battle of the Pyramids. The name itself is evocative, though the battle was fought in the vicinity of Cairo, with the great monument serving as a timeless backdrop to the bloody affair. It was here that Napoleon's French army, numbering around 20,000 soldiers, faced a vastly larger Ottoman-Egyptian force of approximately 60,000 men. The heart of this army, its most feared component, was the Mamluk cavalry, a formidable body of 12,000 elite horsemen. Before the battle commenced, Bonaparte, a master of inspiration, rode before his troops. Pointing towards the ancient wonders looming on the horizon, he delivered a phrase that would echo through history.
Soldiers, from the height of these pyramids, 40 centuries look down on you. He was pitting his disciplined modern army not just against an enemy, but against the weight of history itself. The result of the ensuing battle was a stunning and brutal testament to the changing nature of warfare. The Mamluk cavalry, relying on their traditional tactics of the ferocious all-out charge, threw themselves against the French lines. But instead of disorganized ranks, they met the unbreachable walls of the European infantry square. A disciplined formation of soldiers with bayonets bristling outwards, delivering coordinated volleys of musket fire. The individual bravery and superb horsemanship of the Mamluks were no match for the collective firepower and tactical discipline of the French. The thundering charge broke apart against these islands of steel and lead. The result was a devastatingly one-sided victory for the French. A wounded Murad Bey managed to escape to Upper Egypt with only 3,000 of his horsemen. The rest were killed or scattered. In stark contrast, the French army suffered fewer than 300 casualties. Yet this military campaign had a consequence far beyond the battlefield. The Egyptian expedition was a cultural as well as a military venture. It brought with it scholars and artists who would spark a massive wave of Egyptomania across Europe. Within this wave of fascination, a little-known but crucial legacy was born. The French officers, who had systematically dismantled the Mamluk cavalry in battle, were simultaneously captivated by the beauty and craftsmanship of their weapons. The Mamluk Sabre, with its elegant curve and deadly efficiency, was unlike anything they had seen before. In the aftermath of the fighting, these blades became highly sought-after trophies. French officers began commissioning copies for their own use, admiring not just their effectiveness, but their exotic aesthetic. The Mamluk Sabre was no longer just the weapon of a defeated foe. It was reborn in the eyes of the European military elite as a powerful symbol of status, romanticism, and the allure of the Orient.
The sabre's journey from the battlefields of Egypt to the parade grounds of Europe is a testament to its captivating allure. Following Napoleon's campaign, the Mamluk Sabre was no longer merely a weapon. It had become a potent symbol of martial romanticism. Its popularity first ignited in France, where the returning officers and their captured trophies set a powerful new trend. Throughout the 19th century, this French-led fascination with Eastern aesthetics radiated across the continent, and the Mamluk-style saber was adopted by the military elites of numerous European nations. It became a fashionable and prestigious sidearm, carried not only by officers in elite cavalry regiments, but also by those in the Navy, and it served as a distinguished dress weapon for formal occasions. For Great Britain, the decisive moment that cemented the sabre's place in its military culture was the Battle of Waterloo in 1815. In the aftermath of this epic conflict, which ended Napoleon's reign, the Mamluk sabre saw a surge in popularity throughout the British Army. British officers, much like their French counterparts before them, admired the weapon for its elegant design and the heroic, exotic connotations it carried. It quickly became a widespread and highly sought-after accessory among the officer corps, a status symbol that spoke of worldliness and battlefield prowess. This informal trend received its ultimate endorsement in 1831. In that year, the British Army took the significant step of officially regulating the Mamluk-style sabre as the prescribed weapon for its highest-ranking officers. It was designated as the official pattern for generals and other staff officers, intended for use as both a service and dress weapon. This decision elevated the saber from a fashionable curiosity to a formal piece of military equipment, embedding it deep within the traditions of the British Armed Forces. Interestingly, this pivotal decision is often attributed to one of the era's most celebrated military figures, the Duke of Wellington. The victor of Waterloo himself was known to be a great admirer of this type of sword, and it is widely believed that his personal preference and immense influence were key factors in its official adoption for officers of major general rank and above. What is truly remarkable is the longevity of this tradition. The British Mamluk sabre, pattern 1831/1898, has remained in continuous use within the British Army from its official introduction to the present day. This makes it a rare and enduring link to the military fashions of the 19th century,
a tangible piece of history that survived the radical technological and social transformations of the subsequent centuries, and a direct legacy of that fateful encounter between East and West on the sands of Egypt.
At the dawn of the 19th century, the young United States of America found itself embroiled in a conflict far from its own shores, a war that would unexpectedly forge one of its most enduring military symbols. The First Barbary War, 1801 to 1805, was ignited when the U.S. government, under President Thomas Jefferson, refused to continue paying the extortionate tribute demanded by Yusuf Karamanli, the Pasha of Tripoli, for the safe passage of American merchant vessels in the Mediterranean. In response to this defiance, a daring and unconventional plan was conceived by William Eaton, a former U.S. Army captain and the American consul to Tunis. His strategy was audacious: to overthrow Yusuf by backing his estranged and exiled older brother, Hamet Karamanli, the rightful heir to the throne. What followed was an operation of legendary proportions. Eaton assembled a motley expeditionary force composed of about 200 Christian mercenaries, mostly Greeks, and 300 Muslim mercenaries loyal to Hamet. This small army was joined by a tiny but crucial contingent of United States Marines, a mere 7 men and 2 Navy midshipmen, led by a determined young first lieutenant named Presley Neville O'Bannon. Together, this unlikely coalition embarked on an epic trek across more than 500 miles, sources vary between 521 and 600 miles, of the unforgiving Libyan desert, marching from Alexandria, Egypt, toward the strategic Tripolitan city of Derna. The journey was fraught with peril, and not just from the harsh environment. The expedition was a powder keg of internal tensions. Deep-seated animosity between the Christian and Muslim mercenaries erupted frequently into bitter disputes, at times threatening to boil over into bloody mutiny and completely derail the mission. It was only through Eaton's and O'Bannon's steadfast leadership that the fragile force held together. On April 27, 1805, this exhausted but resolute army arrived at its objective. The Battle of Derna commenced with a naval bombardment from 3 American warships, the USS Nautilus, which was soon joined by the USS Argus and USS Hornet, softening the city's defenses. Then came the decisive ground assault. As one account describes it, after a bombardment from the sea, Lieutenant O'Bannon, at the head of the Marines and a detachment of allies, stormed one of the enemy batteries under heavy fire, and after 2 hours of fierce fighting, captured the Citadel, hoisting the flag of the United States above it. This was a moment of profound historical significance. It marked the very first time in the military history of the United States that the American flag was raised in victory over foreign territory during an armed conflict. The strategic impact was immediate and decisive. With Derna captured and the American naval blockade strangling his economy, the Pasha Yusuf Karamanli faced a direct threat to his capital. The deteriorating situation forced him to the negotiating table, and on June 10, 1805, he signed a treaty ending the hostilities. To celebrate this hard-won victory, a ceremony was held that would change military history. Prince Hamet Karamanli, the American-backed claimant to the Tripolitan throne, sought to honor the young Marine officer, whose bravery had been instrumental in the battle. As a gesture of gratitude and respect, he presented Lieutenant Presley O'Bannon with a beautifully crafted Mamluk-style saber. Imagine the scene. Against a backdrop of the smoking ruins of Derna, amidst the lingering echoes of cannon fire and the cries of the wounded, the young American officer, Presley O'Bannon, stands before Hamet Karamanli. The prince, dressed in opulent Eastern attire, formally presents him with the saber. The African sun glints off the polished steel and ivory hilt. In that moment, the weapon is transformed. It ceases to be a mere trophy of a distant war and becomes a powerful symbol, a tangible link forged in battle between the fledgling American Republic and the ancient warrior traditions of the East.
The heroic exploits of Lieutenant Presley O'Bannon and his fellow Marines on the shores of Tripoli did not fade into obscurity. After his military service, O'Bannon, the celebrated veteran, settled in Logan County, Kentucky, where he continued a life of public service, being elected as a state representative in 1812, 1817, and 1820. While he transitioned to a civilian life, the legacy of his actions at Derna and the magnificent saber he received there were not forgotten by the institution he had served with such distinction. The crucial figure in immortalizing this legacy was Brigadier General Archibald Henderson, the fifth and longest-serving commandant of the United States Marine Corps. Henderson, who led the Corps from 1820 to 1859 and became known as the Grand Old Man of the Corps, recognized the profound symbolic value of the Derna campaign. As a tribute to the outstanding service and heroism displayed by the Marines during the Barbary War, he made a historic decision. In 1825, Commandant Henderson officially authorized the Mamluk-style sabre as the prescribed dress sword for all officers in the Marine Corps. This act transformed O'Bannon's personal gift into a powerful and unifying symbol for the entire officer corps. This tradition has demonstrated remarkable continuity, becoming a defining feature of the Marine Corps uniform and identity. With only two notable exceptions, the Mamluk Sabre has remained the official sword for Marine officers ever since. The first interruption occurred between 1859 and 1875, when officers were required to carry the U.S. Army's Model 1850 foot officer's sword, a move that was later reversed to restore the cherished tradition. The second was a temporary suspension during World War II, a practical measure taken during a period of total war. Today, the Mamluk Sabre is the ceremonial weapon for all Marine Corps officers, a gleaming and essential part of their full-dress uniform, worn with pride at ceremonies, parades, formal functions, and other official events. This deep cultural connection is further immortalized in the very anthem of the United States Marine Corps. The victory at Derna is enshrined in the opening line of the Marines' hymn, which was officially adopted in 1919. From the halls of Montezuma to the shores of Tripoli. These powerful words ensure that the memory of the 1805 campaign endures, forever linking the identity of every Marine to the distant North African coast, where a young lieutenant and a handful of his men first carried the American flag to victory on foreign soil, and in doing so, gave the Corps one of its most treasured symbols.
For nearly 3 centuries, the Mamluks had been the undisputed masters of Egypt, a warrior caste born from slavery who had forged an empire. Yet by the close of the 18th century, their formidable power had begun to erode. The world was changing, and the Mamluks were being left behind. They faced threats from without, as the modernized armies of Europe, with their disciplined infantry and devastating artillery, had proven their battlefield superiority. Just as corrosive were the threats from within, as decades of internal rivalries and factional infighting had weakened their once unbreakable socio-military system. The stage was set for a final, tragic culmination of their long and storied history. The instrument of their demise was Muhammad Ali, the ambitious new ruler of Egypt, an Ottoman Albanian officer who saw the Mamluks as the primary obstacle to his consolidation of power and his plans to modernize the nation. On March 1, 1811, he put a meticulously planned and utterly ruthless plot into motion. Under the guise of a grand celebration, he invited all the leading Mamluk beys and their retinues to his palace, the Citadel of Cairo. The official pretext was to hold a ceremony marking the formal declaration of war against the Wahhabis in Arabia, an occasion that demanded the presence of the country's military leadership. Between 600 and 700 of the most powerful Mamluks in Egypt, clad in their finest regalia, rode up to the citadel, unaware they were riding into a trap. The bloody climax unfolded with chilling precision. After the festivities, the Mamluk procession was guided out of the citadel through a specific route. As they entered a narrow, high-walled road leading down from the Muqattam Hill near the Al-Azab Gate, the massive gates were suddenly slammed shut behind them, trapping them in the confined passage. From the walls above, Muhammad Ali's troops, who had been lying in ambush, opened fire. The narrow defile became a killing ground. Caught in a hail of musket balls with no room to maneuver and no chance of escape, the Mamluks were systematically slaughtered. This brutal and treacherous event would go down in history as the Massacre of the Citadel.
The bloodshed was not confined to that single day or location. The massacre was merely the opening act of a nationwide purge. For the next week, Muhammad Ali's forces hunted down Mamluks across the length and breadth of Egypt. In the Citadel of Cairo alone, it is estimated that over 1,000 were killed. Across the country, the total number of Mamluks and their relatives who were systematically exterminated reached approximately 3,000. Despite the totality of Muhammad Ali's efforts, a small number of Mamluks managed to escape the slaughter, fleeing south into Sudan. In 1811, these desperate refugees established a small state for themselves in Dongola, in the region of Senna, using it as a base of operations for the slave trade. Yet this last bastion was not to be a new beginning. Their reprieve was short-lived. In 1820, Muhammad Ali, determined to eradicate the Mamluk threat once and for all, dispatched an army of 4,000 soldiers into Sudan. His forces advanced, crushed the small Mamluk state, and destroyed their last pockets of resistance. The massacre of the Citadel was more than just a political purge. It was a symbolic act that marked the violent end of an entire epoch. The year 1811 represents the definitive moment when the history of the Mamluks as a political and military force concluded. The era in which a warrior caste, whose members began their lives as slaves, could rise to rule one of the great empires of the Islamic world, was over. While their power was annihilated in a narrow Cairo passage, the memory of their martial prowess would survive, paradoxically preserved not in Egypt, but in the elegant curve of the sabers still carried with honor by the officers of the United States Marine Corps.
To appreciate the Mamluk Sabre is to understand its anatomy, a masterful combination of form and function refined over centuries of battlefield use. The weapon was not a single entity, but a carefully balanced system of components, each with a specific purpose and a distinct aesthetic heritage. Its construction reveals a deep understanding of metallurgy, ergonomics, and the unique demands of mounted combat. The soul of the weapon was its distinctive blade. Typically, this was a curved, single-edged blade with an average length of 75 to 80 centimeters and a width of about 2.5 centimeters at the ricasso, the unsharpened portion of the blade just above the hilt. The blade's most defining characteristic was its constant, continuous curve along its entire length. Crucially, it featured a complete absence of a yelman, the flared and often sharpened back edge near the tip that was common on many other types of Middle Eastern sabers. The hilt, or ephes, was an assembly of parts that defined the weapon's handling and appearance. The grip itself, known as the cherin, was generally made of wood, which was often wrapped in leather or fabric to ensure a secure hold. The grip's length was typically around 10 to 12 centimeters, and it was topped by a rounded pommel, a feature characteristic of Turkish sabers from the 17th century onward. A hole was drilled through the center of this pommel for the attachment of a temniak, a woolen strap or lanyard that looped around the wrist to prevent the warrior from losing his sword in the heat of battle. Protecting the hand was a simple cruciform crossguard, or perikrestia, often made of brass. This design was typical of West Asian weapons from the 16th to 18th centuries. In some examples, the crossguard was connected to the pommel by a thin chain. The saber was carried in a scabbard, or nojni, constructed of a wooden core covered in leather and finished with brass fittings, including a shape at the tip and mounts for suspension. A little-known fact, however, complicates the popular image of these weapons. While the style was authentically Eastern, the vast majority of Mamluk-style sabers carried by European and American officers in the 19th century were not manufactured in Egypt or the Ottoman Empire. They were, in fact, produced in the West, primarily in European workshops. These manufacturers expertly replicated the exotic Ottoman Egyptian features, creating a mythology around authentic Eastern sabers in officer collections, when in reality, many of these prized possessions were high-quality European copies.
The precise specifications of these Western models were often standardized. A typical British general's Mamluk Sabre of the pattern 31 to 1898 had the following dimensions. Overall length, 928 millimeters. Blade length, without hilt, 780 millimeters. Blade width at ricasso, 25 millimeters. Scabbard length, 792 millimeters. Materials, steel, brass, and ivory for the grip. In contrast to these more standardized military patterns, original Egyptian sabers from earlier periods, such as the 15th century, were often masterpieces of decorative art. Their blades frequently featured intricate gold inlays and ornate arabesques. The hilts were works of art in themselves, crafted from bone and covered with sheets of silver, decorated with chaste images, Islamic symbolism, and elegant calligraphy, embodying the wealth and status of the warrior who carried them. Far from being a forgotten relic of a bygone era, the Mamluk Sabre remains a vibrant and integral part of a modern military institution. Today, it is most famously known as an inseparable component of the dress uniform for officers of the United States Marine Corps. It is not merely a decorative accessory, but a powerful symbol reserved for the most significant and solemn moments in an officer's career. The saber is worn with pride during a variety of formal occasions, including ceremonies for the administration of the oath of office, official parades, diplomatic functions, and funerals conducted with full military honors. Its presence at these events elevates them, connecting the present moment to a long and storied past. For the Marine Corps, the Mamluk Sabre serves as a constant, tangible symbol of the institution's deep connection to its own combat history. It is a perpetual reminder of the daring operation at Derna and the heroism of the small contingent of Marines who fought so bravely, so far from their native shores. It embodies a legacy of courage, determination, and the willingness to project force in defense of the nation's interests, no matter how distant the battlefield. What is truly remarkable is the sheer tenacity of this tradition. The regulation to carry the Mamluk Sabre, first adopted in 1825, has endured through immense historical upheaval. It has survived 2 world wars, countless military conflicts across the globe, and the relentless tide of military modernization that has rendered most 19th century equipment obsolete. This makes it an exceptionally rare example of a military tradition from that era that has not only been preserved as a historical artifact, but remains actively practiced in the 21st century. It is a living piece of history, worn proudly by a modern fighting force. Thus, the echo of history resonates every time a Marine officer dons their full dress uniform. In that polished curved blade, they carry the weight of a profound legacy. It is the history of a young lieutenant named Presley O'Bannon, who, more than 200 years ago, raised the American flag over a captured fortress on the shores of North Africa. And it is also the history of that ancient and formidable warrior caste, the Mamluks of Egypt, who, through a series of unlikely historical events, gave the world one of its most elegant and enduring symbols of military honor.